The future of warfare is unfolding right now on the battlefields of Ukraine, and it looks nothing like what military strategists predicted even 5 years ago. Robots are replacing soldiers. Machines are hunting machines. And in a stunning reversal, Russia, one of the world's largest military powers, is desperately trying to copy tactics from a country it assumed would fall within days. I'm Elizabeth Davis, and today I'm taking you deep inside the robot revolution that's transforming modern combat, where Ukraine's innovative use of ground drones has forced Russia into a frantic game of technological catch-up that it's losing badly. What you're about to discover reveals not just the future of this war, but the future of all wars to come. Let me start with the biggest development that's sending shockwaves through military circles worldwide. In Vovchansk, a strategic town near the Russian border, we're witnessing something extraordinary. Russia has renewed its offensive efforts to capture this critical location, pouring troops and resources into what should be, on paper, an achievable objective for a military of Russia's size. But here's what's actually happening. Russia's advancement has quickly stalled and its losses are absolutely skyrocketing. The numbers are staggering and they tell a story of desperation. Russian casualties are now estimated at approximately 33,000 to 35,000 soldiers per month. Let me repeat that because it's such an incomprehensible figure that it's easy to gloss over. 33 to 35,000 Russian soldiers are being killed or wounded every single month. That's more than 1,000 casualties every single day. That's the equivalent of losing an entire brigade-sized unit daily. To put this in perspective, the scale of these losses is underscored by a striking 40% year-on-year surge in military obituaries published in Russian sources. 40% increase. That's not a small uptick or a marginal change. That's a sharp, dramatic deterioration in personnel sustainability that highlights just how catastrophically expensive this war has become for Russia in human terms. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting from a strategic standpoint. While these massive losses have largely been offset by aggressive recruitment campaigns until recently, last month marked a critical turning point. For the first time since the invasion began, Russian recruitment fell slightly short of replacing casualties. This single data point has sounded alarm bells throughout the Russian command structure because it signals something ominous. Replacing manpower will be increasingly difficult from this point forward. Russia is facing a demographic and recruitment crisis, and they know it. So what's their solution? They're desperately trying to copy Ukraine's use of ground drones, attempting to replicate the tactics that have made Ukrainian forces so devastatingly effective despite being outnumbered. And the key word here is trying, because Russia's initial attempts have been, to put it charitably, less than impressive. The first confirmed use cases of Russian ground drones have emerged from Vovchansk, documented by footage from Ukraine's 57th Motorized Brigade. This footage reveals Russia's active attempt to replicate Ukrainian tactics, and it's both fascinating and somewhat pitiful to watch a military superpower struggling to master technology that Ukraine has been refining and deploying at scale for months. Let me walk you through what Russian forces attempted. First, they deployed a ground drone armed with a machine gun, sending it forward to assault Ukrainian positions. The concept makes sense on paper. Use an unmanned system to suppress or eliminate enemy positions without risking human soldiers. Simultaneously, they dispatched another ground robotic system designed to provide logistics support to their frontline troops, delivering ammunition, supplies, or equipment to forward positions. These are exactly the kinds of missions Ukrainian ground drones have been successfully executing for months. Ukraine has demonstrated that ground-based robotic systems can perform offensive tasks, defensive operations, logistics support, medical evacuations, and even mine clearance. It's a comprehensive, integrated approach to unmanned warfare that has transformed how Ukraine fights. But here's where Russia's copycat attempt fell apart completely. Both Russian drones were spotted almost immediately by Ukrainian drone operators who subsequently targeted and neutralized the enemy equipment with precise strikes using FPV drones. Both robots destroyed before they could accomplish anything meaningful. It's a perfect example of the fundamental difference between Ukraine's sophisticated integrated drone operations and Russia's rudimentary, desperate attempts to catch up. These developments show just how badly Russia is struggling to match the evolution of Ukrainian ground drone tactics that are already yielding concrete battlefield results. The contrast couldn't be starker. While Russia is taking its first clumsy steps into ground-based robotics, Ukraine has already built an entire operational doctrine around these systems. The Ukrainian 1st and 3rd Corps, together responsible for holding approximately 25% of the entire front line, have set the standard for this revolutionary approach. These formations are increasingly substituting human manpower with unmanned systems across a stunning range of applications. Ground drones aren't just being employed for offensive strikes or defensive monitoring. They're supporting logistics operations, conducting medical evacuations of wounded soldiers from dangerous areas, and removing mines from contested territory. Think about what this means from a strategic perspective. Ukraine is deliberately shifting the risk from humans to machines. Every logistics mission performed by a ground drone is a mission where a Ukrainian soldier doesn't have to expose themselves to artillery fire, sniper attacks, or mine strikes. Every medical evacuation conducted by a robotic system is a rescue attempt that doesn't require medics to enter kill zones where they might become casualties themselves. This shift reflects a deliberate, calculated effort to offset personnel constraints and protect human lives while maintaining operational coverage and effectiveness across vast stretches of the front line. Ukraine simply doesn't have the population or recruitment base to match Russia's numerical advantages in traditional infantry combat. So instead of trying to win a war of attrition on Russia's terms, Ukraine is changing the fundamental nature of how this war is fought. Now let's zoom in on Vovchansk specifically, because this battle is becoming a case study in how robotic warfare is reshaping modern combat. After nearly a year of relative dormancy along this sector of the front line, Russian forces have renewed major offensive operations designed to penetrate closer to the regional capital of Kharkiv. Russian sources are claiming full control of Vovchansk, declaring another victory for Putin's forces. But as with so many Russian military claims, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Approximately 25% of the town remains actively contested, with Ukrainian forces holding defensive positions and conducting counterattacks. Russia's operational intent appears clear enough: consolidate territorial gains in Vovchansk to establish a staging area for potential follow-on operations toward the next bigger settlement, Vilcha. It's a logical military progression, standard doctrine for offensive operations. Take one objective, consolidate, then use it as a springboard to take the next objective. Despite several unsuccessful infiltration attempts toward Vilcha, Russian officers have been hasty to report to their command structure that they've already captured it. This is a recurring pattern in Russian military operations. Commanders reporting success to avoid punishment or career damage, even when the situation on the ground contradicts their claims entirely. Ukrainian soldiers deployed in the area have reported that these Russian infiltration efforts were detected well in advance and successfully repelled, leaving Vilcha under firm Ukrainian control. The gap between Russian claims and battlefield reality continues to grow, and it's causing serious problems for Russian operational planning when commanders can't get accurate information about actual territorial control. Geolocated footage from the outskirts of Vovchansk shows exactly how Ukrainians are using drones to counter Russian activity and protect the settlements behind their defensive lines. It's a masterclass in modern defensive warfare, and it's worth breaking down the specific tactics because they reveal just how sophisticated Ukrainian drone operations have become. Ukrainian operators are systematically targeting enemy personnel and logistics in the Russian rear areas, disrupting supply lines and operational support to slow down offensive momentum before it can even build. This isn't reactive defense where you wait for the enemy to attack and then respond. This is proactive interdiction, striking Russian forces before they can mass for assault. First, Ukrainians are setting up ambushes using fiber optic controlled drones. These drones wait on the ground, completely stationary and nearly invisible, until Russian soldiers move closer. Then, at precisely the right moment when targets are in optimal kill zones, the drones strike with devastating effect. This tactic is psychologically terrifying for Russian infantry because they never know if that piece of debris or abandoned equipment is actually a dormant drone waiting to explode. Second, Ukrainian drones are controlling the crossing points on the Vovcha River, which runs through the battlefield. Every Russian soldier who attempts to cross becomes a target. Rivers are natural choke points where movement is restricted and troops are vulnerable. Ukraine has weaponized these geographic features by maintaining constant drone surveillance and strike capability. Moreover, Russian buggies, the small, fast-moving vehicles Russia uses to quickly insert troops into contested areas, are being hunted down with priority. These vehicles are crucial for Russian tactics because they allow troops to rapidly enter towns and take cover before Ukrainian forces can respond. By systematically destroying these buggies, Ukraine forces Russian troops to advance on foot, slowing their movement and exposing them to longer periods of vulnerability. To counter Ukrainian drone activity, Russian forces are attempting to infiltrate Vovchansk under cover of darkness, operating at night to reduce exposure to visual detection. It's a reasonable tactical adaptation. Unfortunately for the Russians, Ukrainian drones are equipped with thermal imaging and night vision capabilities specifically designed to detect and neutralize these nighttime infiltration attempts. Darkness no longer provides concealment. The thermal signatures of human bodies and vehicle engines stand out clearly against the cooler background temperatures, making Russian soldiers easier to spot at night than during daytime, when visual camouflage and terrain features provide more effective concealment. Russia is discovering that many of the tactical advantages that traditionally favored attackers simply no longer exist in an era of advanced drone surveillance. With this systematic approach, Ukrainian forces are significantly reducing enemy manpower and preventing Russian troops from accumulating enough forces inside Vovchansk to launch coordinated assaults. It's a strategy of continuous attrition, grinding down Russian numbers before they can achieve the concentration of force necessary for breakthrough operations. The severity of the situation is confirmed by recently deployed soldiers from Russia's 82nd Motorized Regiment, who have published statements describing a battlefield marked by extreme danger and heavy losses. Ukrainian-held positions are characterized in these complaints as near impenetrable fortresses where Russian attacks consistently fail at enormous cost. According to statements released by these soldiers, only about half of the troops sent on assault missions survive. Think about that statistic. A 50% casualty rate means that every time Russian commanders order an attack, they're effectively condemning half their force to death or serious injury. These soldiers are issuing sharp grievances against their command structure and its reckless planning that, in their words, exposes them to certain death. This is extraordinary testimony because Russian military culture typically suppresses public complaints from serving soldiers. The fact that entire units are now openly criticizing their commanders and describing missions as suicide attacks indicates morale problems that go far beyond normal battlefield stress. Overall, these catastrophically high Russian casualties have compelled their forces to emulate Ukrainian tactics, prompting experimentation with ground-based drones as a potential force multiplier. But here's the crucial distinction. These deployments remain rudimentary and ineffective, highlighting a significant capability gap compared with Ukraine's systematic, integrated, drone-centric operations. Let me explain why Russia is struggling so badly to replicate Ukrainian success with ground drones, because it's not simply a matter of buying or building the same hardware. The technology itself is relatively accessible. Commercial drone components are available globally. What Russia lacks is the operational doctrine, the training infrastructure, the institutional knowledge, and the decentralized command culture that allows Ukrainian drone operations to be so effective. Ukraine has spent nearly 3 years building an entire ecosystem around drone warfare. They've established training programs that can rapidly convert civilian volunteers into skilled drone operators. They've developed tactics through constant battlefield experimentation. They've created feedback loops where lessons learned from one engagement are quickly shared across units and incorporated into updated tactics. Perhaps most importantly, Ukraine has embraced a decentralized command philosophy that empowers relatively junior soldiers to make tactical decisions and exploit fleeting opportunities without waiting for approval from higher headquarters. Russian military culture, by contrast, remains highly centralized and hierarchical. Initiative is often punished rather than rewarded, and junior soldiers are expected to follow orders rather than adapt to battlefield realities. This cultural difference manifests in how drones are employed. Ukrainian operators are constantly innovating, trying new tactics, adapting to enemy countermeasures, and sharing successes across the force. Russian operators, when they exist at all, are following rigid procedures and waiting for guidance from commanders who often don't understand the technology they're trying to employ. The result is exactly what we saw in Vovchansk. Russian ground drones deployed without adequate reconnaissance, without coordinated support, without understanding of Ukrainian counter-drone capabilities. Both robots were destroyed almost immediately because Russian operators hadn't thought through how Ukrainian defenders would respond. As a result of these failures and the continuing unsustainable casualties, Russian forces continue to rely on traditional infiltration tactics, no matter how high the attrition rate climbs. They're sending small groups of soldiers, sometimes just 5 or 6 men, on foot through contested territory, hoping they can reach Ukrainian positions before being detected and eliminated. This reliance on human infiltration tactics in an age of ubiquitous drone surveillance is a recipe for disaster, and the casualty statistics prove it. But it also means that ground drones will only become more critically needed for Russia in the near future. They can't continue absorbing 35,000 casualties monthly while recruitment fails to keep pace. Something has to change, and robots represent the only viable option. The broader implications of this robot revolution extend far beyond the current conflict in Ukraine. What we're witnessing is a fundamental transformation in how wars will be fought for decades to come. Traditional military advantages like numerical superiority, artillery firepower, and air superiority are being offset or even neutralized by relatively inexpensive unmanned systems. A ground drone might cost a few $1,000s to produce. The soldier it replaces requires months or years of training, costs tens of thousands of dollars to equip, and represents an irreplaceable human life. From both a financial and humanitarian perspective, the calculation increasingly favors robots over humans for dangerous missions. Ukraine is proving that a smaller military force can effectively contest a much larger adversary by leveraging technology and tactical innovation. Every logistics convoy delivered by ground drone instead of human drivers. Every reconnaissance mission flown by an FPV drone instead of human scouts. every minefield cleared by robotic systems instead of combat engineers. All of these represent force multiplication that allows Ukraine to punch far above its weight class. For Russia, the lesson is uncomfortable but unavoidable. They must either rapidly develop their own sophisticated drone capabilities or continue hemorrhaging unsustainable numbers of soldiers. The early evidence suggests Russia is struggling badly with the former, which means they'll likely continue with the latter until domestic political pressure forces a change in strategy. The Russian military-industrial complex is massive and capable of producing enormous quantities of conventional weapons like artillery shells, tanks, and armored vehicles. But drone warfare requires different skills, different industrial base, different supply chains. Russia needs semiconductor manufacturing, advanced sensor production, software development expertise, and sophisticated manufacturing techniques that are difficult to develop quickly, especially under Western sanctions that limit access to critical components. Ukraine, meanwhile, has built much of its drone industry from scratch during the war, leveraging its robust technology sector, its relationships with Western partners, and its ability to rapidly prototype and field new systems. Ukrainian engineers are iterating through design generations in months rather than years, constantly improving performance based on direct battlefield feedback. The contrast in innovation speed is striking. While Russia experiments with copying basic Ukrainian designs and fails even at that rudimentary level, Ukraine is already moving on to next-generation systems with improved range, better sensors, more sophisticated autonomous capabilities, and enhanced resistance to electronic warfare countermeasures. Looking forward, the implications are profound. If Ukraine can successfully replace significant portions of its frontline manpower with robotic systems, it fundamentally changes the calculus of this war. Russia's primary advantage has always been its larger population and willingness to accept casualties that would be politically unacceptable in most other countries. If Ukraine can inflict those casualties while minimizing its own through robotic substitution, Russia's advantage evaporates. We're already seeing this dynamic play out in places like Vovchansk and Kupiansk, where Ukrainian kill zones are destroying Russian forces at ratios of 20-1 or higher. If this approach scales across the entire front line as Ukrainian commanders intend, Russia faces an impossible choice: continue attacking into robotic kill zones and suffer unsustainable losses, or abandon offensive operations and accept a frozen conflict on unfavorable terms. The Ukrainian 1st and 3rd Corps, holding 25% of the front line with increasingly unmanned systems, may represent just the beginning. If successful, every Ukrainian corps will likely adopt similar approaches, creating a defensive network that's extraordinarily difficult and expensive for Russia to penetrate. For international observers and military planners worldwide, Ukraine is providing an invaluable real-world laboratory for understanding how future wars will be fought. Concepts that were theoretical just a few years ago, like mass drone swarms, autonomous targeting, robotic logistics, are now proven battlefield tactics with documented effectiveness. Countries watching this conflict are undoubtedly updating their own military doctrines, investing in drone technologies, and rethinking how they organize and equip their forces. The traditional division between infantry, armor, artillery, and air forces is being supplemented or even replaced by new categories: drone operators, electronic warfare specialists, autonomous systems coordinators. The human element hasn't disappeared, but its role is changing. Modern soldiers need to be as much technicians and operators as warriors. They need to understand how to employ complex systems, interpret data from multiple sensors, coordinate actions across human and robotic platforms. It's a fundamentally different skill set than traditional infantry training emphasized. Russia's struggle to adapt to these new realities is partly generational and cultural. Their military institutions were built for a different kind of warfare, focused on massed artillery, armored assaults, and overwhelming firepower. Transitioning to precision strikes, autonomous systems, and decentralized operations requires not just new equipment, but new thinking at every level, from individual soldiers up to strategic planners. Ukraine has been forced to innovate or die, which has created powerful incentives for rapid adaptation. Russia, despite its losses, hasn't yet faced existential pressure that would force comparable transformation. Russian leadership still believes they can win through traditional attrition, throwing more soldiers and shells at the problem until Ukraine's will breaks. But the casualty figures suggest this strategy is failing. 35,000 casualties monthly, recruitment shortfalls, declining morale, public complaints from frontline units. These are all indicators that the current approach is unsustainable. Yet Russia continues, sending soldiers into drone-saturated kill zones where half don't survive their first mission. I'm Elizabeth Davis, and what we're witnessing in Vovchansk is more than just another battle in a long war. It's a glimpse into the future of all warfare, where robots increasingly replace soldiers, where tactical innovation matters more than numerical superiority, and where the side that adapts fastest gains decisive advantages. Russia is scrambling to copy Ukrainian tactics, but copying without understanding the underlying principles is doomed to fail. As their destroyed ground drones in Vovchansk demonstrate, being first to master this new form of warfare provides advantages that are difficult to overcome, even for militaries many times larger. The robot revolution is here, and Ukraine is writing the rule book that every military in the world will soon be studying.